My daughter and her husband boxed up everything I owned, left it on the driveway, and told me I was no longer welcome in my own home. I stood there under the Tennessee sun with 63 years of living piled around me like a yard sale nobody asked for. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I pulled out my phone and made one call. 4 days later, my daughter left her 47th voicemail in a row, her voice barely holding together, saying she was sorry, she was desperate, she needed me to please pick up. I was sitting on a screened porch in Clearwater, Florida, watching pelicans dive into the Gulf, and I let it ring. Before we get into all of that, please take a second to subscribe to the channel and drop a comment telling me what time it is where you are right now. I always love hearing from people watching from different corners of the country. The camping trip to the Smokies had been planned for months. 3 days in the backcountry with my old Army buddy Ray. No cell signal, no schedules, nothing but mountain air and whatever we could catch from the stream. I'd been looking forward to it since February. After 35 years running a Florida manufacturing plant in Chattanooga, I'd earned the right to disappear into the woods for a long weekend without apologizing to anyone. I left Thursday morning before dawn, headlights cutting through the fog on Highway 64 while the rest of the house slept. Or at least I assumed they were sleeping. My daughter Lisa's car was in the driveway. My son-in-law Derek's truck was parked at its usual crooked angle beside the garage. Nothing seemed unusual. Nothing felt wrong. I drove away thinking about trout and clean air and 3 days of silence that had nothing to do with being ignored. The drive up into the mountains settled something in my chest that had been tight for months. I rolled the window down and let the cold morning air fill the cab, pine and wood smoke mixing with the smell of rain that had fallen overnight. Ray was waiting at the trailhead with his pack already on, grinning like we were 22 again and not the age where our knees complained every time we went downhill. 3 days later, I came out of the mountains with a sunburned neck, sore shoulders, and the best sleep I'd gotten in years. Ray and I said our goodbyes in the parking lot with the kind of handshake that doesn't need many words. I loaded my gear into the truck and pointed myself back toward Chattanooga, feeling lighter than I had in a long time. I noticed it from the end of the block. Not immediately, because I wasn't looking for it. But something about the light was wrong. The front windows were different. Curtains I didn't recognize hanging where my old blinds used to be. I slowed down as I got closer, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then I saw the boxes, stacked in 2 uneven towers beside the driveway, cardboard flaps open, contents visible where they'd been packed carelessly. I recognized my father's toolbox on top of the nearest stack. The wooden handle of his handsaw was sticking out at an angle, the same saw he'd used to build a workbench in the garage of the house where I grew up. Beside it, a trash bag that had split at the seam, spilling clothes across the concrete. I parked and sat in the truck for a long moment, engine idling, trying to understand what I was looking at. My hands weren't shaking when I climbed out. That surprised me. I walked toward the pile slowly, my boots loud on the quiet street. The afternoon was warm and still. A neighbor's sprinkler ticked somewhere nearby. Everything normal except for the mountain of my belongings sitting on the driveway, like they'd been waiting for me to come claim them. I found my photo albums in the 3rd box I opened. 3 of them, including the one with pictures of my late wife Carol from before we were married. Someone had stacked them flat, which was careless, and the bottom of the box was damp from sitting on the concrete. The cover of the oldest album had warped slightly, the leather buckling along the spine. I held it in both hands and stood there for what felt like a long time. The front door was locked. Different lock. I could see that without even trying my key. The deadbolt was new, bright brass finish that stood out against the old door frame like a fresh wound. I stood on the porch I'd pressure washed myself last spring and tried to understand how I'd arrived at this moment. My phone had a dozen text messages, all received since I'd come back into range on the drive down from the mountains. Most of them were from Lisa. I read them in the order they'd arrived. The first one, sent Friday afternoon. Dad, we need to make some changes around here. We'll talk when you get back. The second, sent Friday evening. We've been doing a lot of thinking. Derek and I feel like it's time for us to have our own space. The rest I didn't finish reading right away. I put the phone in my pocket and walked across the yard to knock on my neighbor Frank's door. Frank was 71, retired postal worker, spent most of his days on his back porch with a book and a glass of sweet tea. We'd traded tools, shared meals on occasion, watched each other's places when one of us was traveling. If anyone had seen what happened while I was gone, it was Frank. He came to the door looking uncomfortable before I'd said a word. His eyes went past my shoulder toward my driveway and then back to my face, and something in his expression told me he already knew why I was standing there. "Harold," he said, "I heard you were coming back today." "What happened, Frank?" He opened the door wider but didn't step aside to invite me in. "Lisa and Derek had people over yesterday, moving things around. I offered to help, but they said they had it under control." "Did they say anything to you about what they were doing?" He looked down at his shoes, said they were reorganizing, said they were giving you some space. "Frank," I kept my voice even. "Look at me. That's everything I own sitting on my driveway in cardboard boxes. Is there anything else you can tell me?" He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry, Harold. I really am. If you need to make some calls, you're welcome to use my porch." I thanked him and went back across the yard. Lisa's car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, Derek's truck right behind her. I'd been sitting on my father's toolbox, which was the sturdiest thing in the pile. My camping gear was still in my truck. I'd thought about leaving, driving to a motel, calling an attorney in the morning, but they needed to say this to my face. Lisa was 38. She had her mother's eyes, which sometimes made looking at her difficult. She got out of the car without looking at me immediately, adjusting her sunglasses like she needed another second to compose herself. Derek came around from his side and positioned himself slightly behind her in a way I recognized. That was his default posture when difficult things needed to be said. Derek was the kind of man who let other people do his difficult conversations. "Dad," she finally looked at me. "We tried to tell you before you left, but the timing wasn't right." "Tell me what, Lisa?" "That we need this space." She gestured at the house behind her, the house that had been part of my life for 9 years. "Derek and I have been talking about this for a while. We love you, but we need room to grow, to have our own life, without a roommate." I looked at Derek. He examined the ground near his feet. "I'm not your roommate," I said. "I'm your father. You know what I mean." She took a breath, and I could see she'd prepared this, rehearsed it. "You've been so helpful, and we appreciate everything you've done. But we need independence. Every married couple needs their own space eventually. This is just the natural next step." Natural next step. I said it slowly, letting the words sit in the air between us. "We've packed your things." She nodded toward the boxes. "Everything that's yours. We made sure to get it all. Derek even went through the garage and got your tools." Derek had not looked up from the driveway. "The lock is changed," I said. "We can get you a key, if there's something we missed." "Where am I supposed to go?" She had an answer ready, which told me she'd thought about this in the way you think about a problem you want to solve quickly and then stop thinking about. She mentioned a senior living community on the east side of town, said she'd looked it up and it had good reviews. She mentioned my sister in Birmingham. She mentioned that at my age, independent living could be its own kind of freedom. At your age, I was 63. I'd run 5 miles a week until my knee surgery 2 years ago. I'd just spent 3 days hiking in the Smoky Mountains. Derek finally spoke. "We're not trying to hurt you, Harold. We just think it's time." 9 years, I said. "I've lived here for 9 years. I helped you buy this house. Before you could qualify on your own, I signed the papers. Every time there was a shortfall on a payment, I covered it. When the water heater failed and you didn't have the reserves, I paid for a new one. When you needed a new roof 2 years ago, who wrote the check?" "We're grateful," Lisa said, and her voice had shifted into something more careful. "We've always been grateful, but gratitude doesn't mean we're obligated to live with you forever." It was the word obligated that did it. Not the cruelty of the phrasing, not even the fact that my daughter was saying this to me while my wife's photo album sat warping in a damp cardboard box. It was obligated, like I was a bill they'd been paying and were ready to stop. I nodded once. "I'll get my camping gear out of the truck and put it with the rest," I said. "Give me a few minutes." Lisa looked slightly surprised. She'd perhaps expected more resistance, more pleading. "Take whatever time you need," she said, in the voice of someone who thought they had won. I spent 40 minutes sorting through the boxes. Not because I needed to, but because I needed to think clearly, and physical work had always been where I thought most clearly. I'd learned that in 35 years on a factory floor, where the right solution to a problem almost always revealed itself, while your hands were occupied with something practical. As I worked, I was cataloging, not just my possessions, which were largely intact, carelessly handled, but mostly undamaged. I was cataloging 9 years of information I'd stored without fully examining. The mortgage paperwork I'd signed when Lisa and Derek couldn't qualify on their own. The way the loan officer had explained that the property needed a primary borrower with established credit and income history. The way I'd signed without reading every line, trusting that the arrangement was what it appeared to be. I loaded what I could into the truck. Clothes, tools, the photo albums wrapped in a dry jacket so they wouldn't warp further. Carol's jewelry that I'd kept in a box in the closet, still there when I'd checked, though only because Lisa probably hadn't known it had value. I left what wouldn't fit, and didn't bother to note what I was leaving. Things were just things. When I drove away, neither Lisa nor Derek waved. The Hampton Inn off I-75 had a vacancy and decent coffee in the lobby. I took a room on the third floor with a view of the interstate and spent the first hour going through the rest of Lisa's text messages. The sequence told a story. Friday afternoon, the plan was already in motion. By Saturday morning, Derek had taken my boxes to the driveway while I was still in the mountains. Sunday, they'd changed the locks. They'd waited for me to be out of town. They'd planned this around my camping trip. I thought about that for a while. Then I called Patricia Moore. She was a property attorney who'd handled a real estate matter for a man I used to work with. He'd spoken well of her. Her emergency line connected to a tired but alert voice that said she had a Sunday evening opening for urgent consultations. I need to understand my legal standing regarding a residential property, I told her. I co-signed a mortgage and made the majority of payments. I need to know exactly what my rights are. Bring everything you have, she said. Loan documents, deed records, tax paperwork, anything with your name on it. I had most of it. 35 years of factory work had made me a systematic man. I kept important documents in a fireproof box that I'd packed into my truck without thinking much about it, the same way I packed my tools. Some things you just carry with you because getting caught without them is worse than the weight. Patricia Moore's office was a converted Victorian on Broad Street that she shared with 2 other attorneys. She met me herself, which suggested my case had sounded sufficiently urgent, and she was the kind of professional who stayed late on Sundays when something genuinely needed her attention. She spread my documents across her conference table and read carefully. I've learned not to fill silences when people are reading. You can tell a lot about how information is landing by watching someone's face while they work through it. Her face, after about 15 minutes, said something interesting. "Mr. Doyle," she said, setting down the deed. "According to this paperwork, you are the sole owner of record for the property at 4147 Birchwood Lane." I'd suspected something like this was possible. Hearing it stated plainly was still something else entirely. What about Lisa and Derek? They are not named on the deed or the mortgage instrument. As far as the county property records are concerned, this property belongs entirely to you. Your daughter and son-in-law have no legal ownership interest whatsoever. I looked at the documents she slid toward me. My name in the spaces that mattered. The loan issued to me. The deed filed in my name. 9 years, and neither Lisa nor Derek had ever bothered to look closely at whose name was actually on the papers. At best, Patricia continued, reviewing her notes, they could be characterized as occupants or tenants, though there's no lease agreement to establish even that status formally. You have the legal right to demand they vacate. You have the right to sell. You have every remedy available to a property owner dealing with unauthorized occupants. The house had been appraised 18 months ago for insurance purposes. I still had that paperwork too. What's the current market value, roughly? Patricia checked a database on her laptop. Comparable properties in that neighborhood are moving between $420 and $450. Yours has been well maintained. You'd likely be in the upper part of that range. $440,000. I'd helped them buy a house that turned out to be mine. I'd paid the mortgage, covered the shortfalls, replaced the roof, bought a new water heater, and lived like a house guest in my own property while my daughter told her friends they owned a nice place in East Chattanooga. What's the fastest timeline for a sale? She talked me through the process. Listing, showing, offer, closing. In a good market, with motivated sellers and buyers, 6 to 8 weeks was realistic. The current market was good. I thanked her and asked for copies of everything. The drive back to the Hampton Inn felt different, not lighter exactly. More like the kind of clarity that comes after a long, hard task gets finished, and you can finally see the full shape of what you've accomplished. I'd gone into that office with suspicions and come out with documentation. I called Tom Bradley the next morning. He'd sold a house for my former coworker Gus 3 years ago, and Gus had described him as someone who got things done without wasting time on conversations that didn't move the process forward. That was the kind of realtor I needed. Tom met me at the Hampton Inn breakfast area with a folder of comparable sales and a direct manner I appreciated. I explained the situation with minimal detail: property owner, current occupants needing to relocate, timeline as fast as professionally possible. He looked at his comps and nodded. This is a desirable area. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, corner lot. If we price it right, I'd expect multiple showings in the first week and a serious offer within 10 to 14 days. I want it listed by Wednesday. Professional photos Tuesday. He wrote something on his notepad. The current occupants, will they be cooperative with showings? I handed him a copy of my ownership documents. The current occupants don't have any say in the showing schedule. I'm authorizing you to proceed with full access. I'll arrange for a locksmith to provide you a key. He looked at the documents without visible reaction, the professional neutrality of someone who'd seen complicated family real estate before. Understood. I'll have the paperwork ready for you this afternoon. By noon, the house was going on the market Wednesday. By 1, I'd reserved a rental car for a longer trip. By 2, I'd called my brother Dennis in Clearwater. Dennis was 67 and had retired 4 years ago to a house 3 blocks from the Gulf. We talked on the phone every few weeks, but hadn't been in the same place since Christmas 2 years ago. When I explained what had happened, he was quiet for a moment and then said, "Get down here. Stay as long as you want." That was Dennis. He'd always been that way. I turned off my phone at the Chattanooga city limits and didn't turn it back on until I crossed the Georgia state line 8 hours later, somewhere between Valdosta and the Florida border, when I decided I wanted music, and the car radio wasn't cooperating. The missed calls were already accumulating. 14 from Lisa, 6 from Derek, 2 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be Derek's mother. I put the phone on the passenger seat and drove. Dennis met me in his driveway with 2 cold beers and the kind of expression that said he'd seen worse situations resolved. His wife Karen made dinner, the real kind, and the 3 of us sat on the screened porch watching the light change over the neighborhood while I told them the whole story from the camping trip forward. Karen said the thing I already knew. You gave them 9 years and everything you had, and they thought that was just the price of having you around. That's exactly what they thought, I agreed. Dennis refilled my beer. And now? And now they're living in a house that's going on the market Wednesday. He smiled slowly. Good. I slept 9 hours that first night, which was more than I'd slept in one stretch since before Carol died. The guest room smelled like salt air and fabric softener in complete absence of obligation. I didn't dream about anything I remembered. The next morning I turned my phone on over coffee on the porch. The number had grown, 43 missed calls. Lisa had left 11 voicemails. I listened to the first one. "Dad, there are people in our yard taking pictures of the house. What is going on? Call me back immediately." The second one, several hours later. "Dad, I talked to a real estate agent. She has paperwork showing she's working for you. I don't understand. Please call me." Third, that evening, her voice starting to fracture along the edges. "Dad?" Derek looked up the property records. "He says your name is on the deed. We didn't know. We didn't realize. Please, just call me so we can talk about this." I set the phone down and watched a brown pelican work the shoreline. It covered the same 50 yards of beach in a slow patrol, utterly unconcerned with anything that wasn't a fish. I found that restful. Tom Bradley had sent professional updates by text. Excellent response to the listing. 2 showings Monday, 3 more scheduled for Tuesday. A young couple had already expressed serious interest. First-time homeowners, pre-approved financing, highly motivated. I responded to Tom's messages promptly. I did not respond to Lisa's. Derek called on the 3rd day. He had never called me directly before. In 9 years, communication between us had always run through Lisa, which said everything you needed to know about what kind of son-in-law he'd been. His voicemail lasted almost 3 minutes, which told me he'd been thinking about what to say for a while. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't fully understood the situation, which was technically true in the narrowest possible sense, and deeply dishonest in every other sense. He said they'd had no intention of leaving me homeless, which I noticed was different from saying they hadn't intended to throw me out of my own home. He said they were scared about what was going to happen with the house. He asked me to call back. I spent that afternoon on the beach with a paperback and a cold drink. The Gulf was calm, green, blue, and warm, with small waves that barely qualified as waves. A group of children were building an elaborate sand structure further down the beach, their project getting bigger and more complicated with each new idea. I watched them for a while and thought about the way children just keep building, unself-conscious and entirely committed to whatever they're making in this exact moment. I hadn't felt that way in years. On the fourth day, 47 missed calls. Lisa's latest voicemail. Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. We've been trying to find something to rent, but the market here is terrible right now, and we can't afford to buy something on short notice. We need more time. Please just talk to me. I know we handled this wrong. I know we hurt you. But you're our family, and you can't just sell the house out from under us without giving us a chance to fix this. Please. I sat with that one for a while. She was right that they had nowhere to go. She was right that the market was difficult. She was right that I was her family. She was not right that I couldn't sell my own house. There is a particular kind of clarity that comes from sitting by the ocean and removing yourself from the noise of a situation you've been too close to for too long. I'd spent 9 years inside the daily reality of living in that house, adjusting and accommodating and making myself small so the people who shared it with me would feel comfortable. You stop seeing the pattern when you're part of it. Distance shows you the whole picture. The pattern was clear now. Every time I had been generous, they'd absorbed it and reset to a new baseline where that level of generosity was simply expected. Covered a mortgage payment? Then, covering mortgage payments was what I did. Paid for the roof? Then paying for major repairs was my role. Stayed in my room to give them space? Then staying out of the way was my permanent position. Gratitude, expressed initially, evaporated quickly, and was replaced by the quiet expectation that tomorrow I would do what I'd done today. Until the mortgage was paid off, and they decided I was done being useful. Tom Bradley called Thursday morning with news. The young couple, Brandon and Melissa, had submitted a formal offer. $435,000, contingent on inspection within 7 days, closing in 30. They were thorough and motivated, and had a very clear vision of starting their family in that house. I told him to accept. He walked me through the next steps: inspection scheduling, required disclosures, timeline for the current occupants to vacate. I asked him to send the official notice to the property address, which was legally required. He was professional and efficient and didn't ask questions that weren't his business. After we hung up, I called Dennis in from the yard and asked him to sit with me on the porch for a minute. It's done, I told him. Accepted an offer this morning. He nodded. How do you feel? I thought about that. Honestly, like something heavy has been set down that I'd been carrying so long I forgot it had weight. Karen brought out a pitcher of lemonade without being asked. That woman had always understood when a moment needed something simple and good. I turned my phone back on fully that afternoon for the first time since leaving Chattanooga. The notifications were a wall of noise, calls, texts, a voicemail from Lisa's friend that I deleted without listening to, even a message from my church pastor back home, which told me Lisa had been reaching out widely in her search for leverage. I didn't respond to any of it. I spent 2 more weeks in Clearwater. Dennis and I fished off the pier in the mornings and watched baseball in the evenings. Karen taught me how she made her lemon cake, which had always been the best thing at any family gathering I could remember. I slept well every night and woke up without the low-grade tension that had been my first sensation every morning for years. Tom sent updates. Inspection passed cleanly, which was no surprise given how carefully I'd maintained the property. Brandon and Melissa were excited. Their realtor described them as the happiest buyers she'd worked with all year. They were already planning which room would be the nursery. On a warm Tuesday, I drove back to Tennessee. I was unloading the rental car in the parking lot of the extended stay apartment I'd booked before leaving Chattanooga when I heard them. I turned and they were walking across the lot toward me, Lisa in front, Derek slightly behind her, which was consistent. They looked like people who'd been through something. Lisa's face was thinner than I remembered, or maybe it was just that I was seeing it differently now, without the daily habituation that makes you stop really looking at someone. Dad. Her voice had none of the prepared certainty from the driveway. She sounded the way she used to when she was 16 and had done something she knew was wrong and was hoping I'd be understanding about it. I'd always been understanding. She'd counted on that. You're back. I got back this morning, I said. We've been trying to reach you. Derek's voice was careful, measured. We didn't know about the deed, Harold. I want you to understand that. We genuinely thought. You thought what you wanted to think, I said. I kept unloading the car. That was never formally established, was it? whose name was on the papers, what the legal situation actually was. It was comfortable not to examine it too closely. "We made a terrible mistake," Lisa said. Her voice was cracking. "Not just the deed, the way we handled it, the way we talked to you. We were wrong." I carried a box to the door of the building and set it down and turned to face them. "Lisa," I let the name sit for a second. "Do you remember what Derek said to me on that driveway?" She was quiet. He said, "We're not trying to hurt you, Harold. We just think it's time. And you said that gratitude doesn't mean you were obligated to live with me forever. Those were your exact words." "Obligated." "I know." Her voice was very small. "You'd been planning that for months. You waited until I was in the mountains. You had boxes packed. You'd already changed the locks. That wasn't an impulsive decision, Lisa. That was calculated." Derek had still not said anything worth saying. "We panicked," Lisa offered. "We thought once the mortgage was paid off, we needed to establish that it was our house. We let Pamela," she caught herself, substituting a name that had slipped out, one I recognized as Derek's older sister, who had opinions about everything and the force of personality to impose them. "We listened to the wrong advice." There it was. Derek's sister Pamela had been in their ear probably for months. I'd noticed the change in atmosphere around her visits but hadn't connected the dots. Now I could see the whole picture. "The house closes Friday," I said. "Brandon and Melissa are a young couple starting their family. They're going to be happy there." "Dad, please." Lisa stepped forward. "Please don't do this. We'll pay rent. We'll put it in writing. We'll do whatever you need. We just need time." I picked up my box again. "You told me I wasn't needed anymore." I looked at her steadily over the top of the cardboard. "That's the thing you don't seem to understand, Lisa. You were right. I wasn't needed. But there's a difference between not being needed and not having any power. You confused the two. You thought that since you didn't need me, I had nothing left to offer and nothing left to take away. You forgot that a person who's been giving for 9 years has been accumulating something the whole time." "What does that mean?" Derek finally spoke. "It means you're adults," I said. "You told me to figure out my own housing situation. You can do the same." The elevator lobby was quiet and cool after the afternoon heat. I put my boxes down and leaned against the wall and thought about Carol. She had died 5 years ago, a sudden cardiac event on a Tuesday morning in March, the kind of death that leaves no time for final conversations or organized goodbyes. I'd spent years after that looking for a place to belong again, looking for family to be part of, looking for a reason to be useful to someone who wanted me around. I'd found something to belong to, and I'd given it everything I had, and one day it looked at me and decided I was used up. But I wasn't used up. That was the thing they'd miscalculated. A man who spent 40 years solving practical problems on a factory floor knows how to adjust when the situation changes. You assess what's actually in front of you, you use the resources actually available to you, and you don't waste time grieving the version of events you thought you were living. The closing was on Friday as scheduled. Brandon and Melissa sat across the table from me looking like people embarking on the best chapter of their lives. Their realtor kept glancing at their faces and smiling. That energy, the pure, unguarded anticipation of two people who are about to get something they've worked hard for and genuinely love, was the best thing I'd seen in months. I signed where I was asked to sign and answered the questions I was asked to answer. At the end of it, the title company representative handed me a check and a copy of the executed transfer documents. Melissa teared up a little and said they were going to take such good care of the house. I believed her completely. Walking out into the summer morning with that check in my jacket pocket, I felt the particular satisfaction of a problem fully solved, not the small satisfaction of winning an argument or getting the last word. The deep satisfaction of having done something real, having taken a situation that looked like a dead end and found the actual exits that were there all along. I had options now that I hadn't let myself think about for 9 years. Where to live, how to spend the money I'd been putting into other people's mortgage for nearly a decade, what kind of day to have tomorrow. None of those decisions needed to account for anyone else's preferences or comfort. Lisa called that afternoon. I answered. She cried for a while and I let her. Then she said she was sorry in the specific way that meant she was sorry about the consequences as much as the actions, which was the best version of apology she had available right now. Maybe in time, she'd get to the other kind. I didn't know. I told her she and Derek needed to find a stable place to live and focus on that. I told her I would be reachable by phone, which was different from what I'd offered over the past 3 weeks. I told her I loved her because it was true, and some things stay true regardless of what's been done with them. I did not tell her where I was living or what my plans were. There was a long quiet on the line, and then she said, "I thought you'd always be there." "I know," I told her. That was the problem. We said goodbye, and I sat in the parking lot of my extended stay apartment for a while after the call ended. The afternoon was warm and slightly hazy, the way August afternoons in Tennessee tend to be. A family was loading into a minivan 2 spots over, kids arguing about something in the comfortable way that means nobody is actually upset. I had an appointment with a realtor in Maryville the following week to look at a small house near the river, something with a workshop space and a decent yard and proximity to the mountains without being in anyone else's home. Ray had mentioned that the trout fishing was excellent all season in that area. I'd given away 9 years of my life trying to belong to something that was never going to hold me the way I needed to be held. I was 63 years old, and I'd just sold a house and cleared $400,000, and I had no schedule and no one to answer to, and the mountains were 40 minutes away. You could call it a hard ending. Or you could call it exactly what it was, the only kind of beginning worth having. The kind you build yourself, with your own hands, on ground that is actually, legally, completely yours. If this story meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Leave a comment telling me what you thought about Harold's decision and whether you would have done the same. I'll see you in the next story.